Matt Stone and Trey Parker have done it again. SouthPark, the Fractured Butthole, continues directly on from the Stick of Truth in this brand new action RPG that this time delves into the superhero genre rather than the fantasy tropes of its predecessor. While this is a review, all footage you will be seeing in the background is from the first few hours of the game, so don't worry, everything I'm about to talk about and everything you're about to see will be spoiler free. So if anyone has seen the most recent episode of the season 21 episode of SouthPark titled Franchise Prequels, you'll know that at the end of the episode, the Coon and Friends franchise breaks up into two groups, the Coon and Friends and the Freedom Pals, and they both set out to create their own superhero franchise. Following on directly from the end of the Stick of Truth, you once again find yourself as the King of Zaron, or of SouthPark to be accurate, and you're summoned to the battlefield in order to help your friends and fellow heroes. Meanwhile, something, has become a bit jumbled up, and you end up getting recruited into the superhero group Coon and Friends as the boys decide they don't want to play fantasy anymore and they want to play superheroes. This is where the game really begins. It's from here that you get to choose your initial class, the Speedster, the Boulder, or the Blaster. Now, this may seem like 3 classes down from the traditional 4 in the Stick of Truth, but don't worry, there's far more class and character customization in this game revolving around abilities and things than previously. Later things will unlock and you'll have access to a wide variety of abilities as you progress through the storyline. It just starts off a little more narrow, but once it builds up, you really get access to some cool things. Another thing to note in this new game is that character customization is very different. You now have an aesthetic superhero costume which you can unlock things, different hats, gloves, bodies, that sort of thing that is purely cosmetic. You can dye those costumes, and you can change the colour. And you could incorporate that with things such as masks or even, facial details like freckles, face paint and all that kind of stuff. However, your actual sort of stats progression, alongside leveling up, of course, is you now have what's called an artifact. Now, these are just sort of they're stat sticks essentially, and they're little items that you put in slots that increase that enhance and increase certain abilities. So some will enhance your physical damage, some will enhance your psychic abilities, and so on and so on. So it's very different from, say, getting new armour and weapons like in a more traditional RPG, but I think that this system fits quite well from what I've experienced so far, as it kind of fits in with the superhero motif of sort of, this is your superhero, this is who you are, rather than, constantly changing your equipment and looking different. Which kind of, doesn't fit into the whole superhero franchise that they've got going on in the storyline. Combat this time around is much different than it was previously. This time, the battles take place on a large grid, which can also change in size depending on the environment that you're fighting in. Whereas before, in the Stick of Truth, for example, you would be fighting most of the time alone, sometimes with a combat companion, just one. Now you're fighting sort of as a team of up to 4. That is including yourself, along with all the other members of Coon and Friends. And so you fight on this sort of grid, and it takes a real emphasis sort of in movement, positioning, as most of the attacks have sort of a telegraph of, this is where you'll hit, so you have to sort of move and position in order to do certain moves. So they've kind of taken a whole new sort of direction and completely overhauled the combat system. I'm still getting used to it, as I did quite like the turn-based Stick of Truth. I felt it worked, it flowed very nicely. This time it is good, it's a lot of fun. The only thing I will say on the negative side is that I've been in one or two fights that seemed quite full, like there was a lot going on. Now I don't know if that was just me or just, you know, how I moved, but it's just something to bear in mind. But other than that, I really like this new direction they've taken with combat. It feels very fluid, it works, it's clean. It's a lot of fun. The fights tend to last a lot longer than they did in the previous SouthPark game, but I suppose that's just due to the fact that there's more enemies, there's more of you, there's more turns going on that take up the time in the battle. So now let's get onto the story. Don't worry, as I said at the beginning of the video, it is spoiler free. What I've experienced so far has had me in stitches. The game is incredibly funny, as any fan of SouthPark will just immediately, from the very beginning of the game, you'll be laughing so much, especially all the new characters that are now in the game. The evolution of SouthPark with the areas such as Sopa and Shitty Town from season 19, as well as, you know, characters such as PC Principal now make appearances, and it's just got this sort of, you'll smile the whole way through. Again, as I said, I've only played about the first sort of 6-7 hours now. All footage and everything you're seeing in the background is in the first 2. But I was smiling the whole way through. I mean, that's coming from a huge SouthPark fan. So I absolutely love the storytelling and the writing. It's just, it brings a smile to my face. So now let's talk a little bit about the world itself. The game is largely, in terms of navigation, exactly the same. That's not to say it's entirely the same, but the majority of the way SouthPark is laid out is near identical to the Stick of Truth, with the exception of a few areas, certain streets being longer. So for example, there's a few more houses and things, but the overall layout and how you get around, everything is in sort of, you know, the same space. So you still live next door to Butters still lives next door to Cartman, and so on, and sort of how you get around the fast travel system is largely the same. These aren't necessarily bad things, as I found, you know, it was very easy to get around, it's clear, it's simple, this is where you've got to go next. So there's no sort of real problems with navigation. As I mentioned previously, with the new sort of gentrified districts of SouthPark, such as Sopa and then Shitty Town, I was kind of hoping it might be a little different there, but it's not something that sort of I found as a problem. I mean, some people might see it as lazy, but for me it hasn't been an issue, but it's just something worth noting. So to summarise, first thing I will say is I am a big SouthPark fan, so once again, you know, it's something that sort of really appeals to me, so I don't want to come across like I have a feeling of bias. But even if you're not a SouthPark fan, and even if you haven't played the Stick of Truth, I mean, I would recommend playing the Stick of Truth and watching the show by all means, but this game regardless will just make you laugh. It's fun, the gameplay, it works, it doesn't feel broken in any way, you know, it's just got that very SouthPark feel. It's like playing an episode, and the combat's fun, it's got a degree of challenge to it without it being too difficult, and you'll just have a really good time. So I highly recommend picking up this game. As through just what I've played so far, I'd say the game is brilliant. That's not to say it doesn't have its issues. For me, it's mostly very minor nitpicky things, as I said, like the world design being more or less the same. But other than that, I'm loving this game so far, and I can't wait to play more.